Welcome to Python MyPy. In this episode we're going to take a look at strings, we're going to take a look at some functions, and we're going to have a look at ways of inserting data into strings externally. So the first thing we're going to look at is adding two strings together. So if we go my first name equals Daniel and my second name equals Foreman, we then have two variables. And then we can have my whole name equals, and all we do for this is type in the two values. So my first name, and we're going to add a space between these two, and then we're going to add my second name. And then rather than typing in the variable name into shell all the time, we're going to use a print statement. So print, and we're going to print my whole name. So now when we save and run, we receive Daniel Foreman as a whole name. Now if we were to remove the space and run the program again, you'll notice the name is jammed together. So that's why we add in that spacer. Now it's worth noting that in the previous lesson I demonstrated using single quotes. However, here I've used double quotes. So you can actually use either single quotes or double quotes and it will gain the same effect, as you can see. This is very useful because if you ever want to write a sentence that has double quotes in it, you can simply say Daniel, and if I was to add in, say, my middle name for any reason, I can add in double quotes within single quotes, and that allows me to add quotes to something without it interfering. However, if I was to try to do this with double quotes, it would fail because it would read multiple strings. As you can see, this is no longer green because it's considering this to be a complete string, and then whatever's here a string, and then everything else in the middle is part of the code. So if I was to run this, it will come up with an error. As you can see, there's a syntax error with this. So that's the reason we use either single or double quotes. It's up to you which one you decide to use. However, there are some situations where you may want to put double quotes into a string or even single quotes into a string, depending what you want to do. You can also attach some functions to the string. So for example, if I go down to print here and I type in .upper and some brackets and then I stop and run, you'll now notice that it's returning what is clearly a lowercase as an uppercase statement. So what functions do is they perform a function on something. So they are very much a function of the program, something that acts with a purpose. We'll go into functions in greater detail in later lessons, but for right now it's good to know that we can perform these actions on strings simply by using a dot, the name of the function, and then some brackets. And the opposite of upper, of course, will be lower. So if I was to change this to Daniel and we ended up having a mixed situation where one was uppercase and one was lowercase, then we can make them all lowercase simply by typing in lower, as you can see, or we can type in upper, and this is a way of making it consistent, whereas if we remove this feature altogether, we would end up with a mixed case situation. We have another situation where we can actually swap the case around. So if we go swap case, it should reverse the two cases. So now we've got lower here and upper here. So as you can see, functions, also known as methods, apply an action to the string. You can also insert other data into your strings. An example of this would be if I created some extra data, my age, present, and money. And we're going to have different types. So we're going to have 40, which is an integer. We're going to have laptop, which is a string. And we're going to have 1599, which of course is a float. Then we're going to create message, and message is going to be happy birthday. And rather than typing the name in directly, I'm going to insert a string. Now we insert a string by doing the %sign and s. So that means string. You are, and then we go integer because it relates to the age, today, comma. You have a, and this is going to be another string because it's laptop, so s as a present, and we're going to type in percentage and F for float, birthday money. So this on its own won't work, so what we need to do is pass the data back into the string. So we do this by having %sign and then we enter the data in order that it's appeared in the string. So we've got my whole name, comma, my age, comma, and we have present, comma, and finally money. Now we're going to change this print statement to print out message, and we're going to stop and we're going to run. As you can see, it says happy birthday Daniel Foreman, so it's grabbed this data up here and it's inserted it there. You are 40 today, which is the integer value here. We have laptop as part of the string, and that's represented by this string here, and we have a bit of an odd one where we've got 15.990000 birthday money. So the way we control this float, so it only gives us a certain number of decimal points, is to simply type in the number we want. So we want the total number of characters we can have for the first half, followed by the total number of characters we can have afterwards. So we do this with 2.2. So it's only ever going to be 15.99. So if we stop and run this, we now see that it comes out as 15.99. Now if I was to adjust this to 3, stop and run, we should have that 0 again. As you see, that 0 has appeared. And if we just put 1, then it'll only show 9. In fact, it's rounded it all the way up to 16 as a result of that. So we type in 2 as it should be, so it's 2 decimal points. We then have the value. Now if we were to change this one to 1, you then see that makes no difference at all. So you can get away with that. But when it comes to changing the second decimal point, that does affect, because it does affect the calculation that's represented, as you can see. If we were to set this to 45 rather than 99, it should then round down. So as you can see, it's now 15.4. If I was to go 49, it should round up to 15.5. There you go. So now you know how to add some strings together to make one whole string. You know how to create a bunch of other data and insert it into a string using this method. And this symbol here is known as an operator. You might ask the question, why is this particularly useful in a static program like this? And the answer is, it isn't always. But programs tend to update on a cycle by cycle basis. And if you wanted to generate lots of random names and numbers, then you can reuse this string, but just change the individual data points to completely change the name, the age, the birthday gift, and the present. There are many situations where this is useful. It is worth noting that this first number here actually controls the number of initial spaces. So if I type in 5 and then run, you'll notice we got some extra spacing here. So if I was to change that to 7, you'll see a more dramatic space increase, like so. So it is making more room for those initial characters, but because there are no numbers to fill it, it's simply entering spaces as well. So if you take this back down to 1, then if we go to the integer value and type in 5, we'll add some spaces in front of that as well, as you can see. However, this method will not work with strings. So if you want to add additional spaces in front of that and type in 5, then you'll notice it's made no difference. Or if you increase the value, you'll now notice it does. So if you have more characters than there are initial spaces, then it simply won't add spaces to it. It will simply be counting the number of characters. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 there are 14 characters there. So if I type in 14, it should make no difference. I can see that appears normal. However, if I raise that to 16, we should end up with an extra space, as you can see, or in this case 2 extra spaces. So if for any reason you want to add some extra spaces into a string or before a string, you can do using this method as well, which can be useful in some situations where you want to add indentation. We can also use the .format method to do the same thing. So if I then replace these with curly braces, and this has the advantage in that you don't have to identify the kind of data you're inserting into the program, and then we change this to .format and then stop and run, you'll see that everything happens in exactly the same way. The only advantage is you haven't had to worry about whether it's an integer, a string, or a float. Using either of these methods is perfectly acceptable within Python. In the next lesson, we'll learn about converting different types of data into other forms. So, for example, integers into floats and floats into integers and integers into strings. Hi, if you'd like to see more content from us, please like and subscribe this channel. Thank you.